So Mark, let's begin. We're going to talk today about the use of videos in internal comms, in particularly in the
Yeah.
banking sector, which you were involved with quite heavily. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're going to go back now 45 years. Can you believe that? To the 1980s. And when I was just starting out as a wet behind the ears video producer and director.
Excellent. So the first question is, how did you become involved in making videos for British High Street banks in the 1980s?
I
And
was,
also,
yeah.
yeah, and which banks did you work for? So how did you get involved and who did you work for?
Okay, great. So I started off in life working in documentaries for
Hmm.
the government, for the Central Office of Information, and started moonlighting for these new corporate guys and discovering that you could make much more money that way. And it was much more fun. And so I joined a company called Crown back in those days, which has nothing to do with the Crown Film Unit, although they bought the name from the Crown Film Unit.
Yes.
It was actually a commercial offering run by an ex-BBC producer called Paul Ellis. And I joined them, and they had Midland Bank as their client and NatWest. So it was the leading video production company at the time. So it had most of the big names. And back in the 80s, there were two companies really using video a lot, NatWest and Midland. I spent more time working on Midland, so we'll leave those a second, but maybe talk about NatWest first.
Okay, so let me just get on to the second question here. What was your how did you get involved in them though? So was it because you were working for Crown or because I don't know?
Yeah, it was basically, it's like a taxi rank system, when you're working in corporate video back in those days. Corporate video was really, really hot. It was the new thing. Pneumatic players had come along, VHS for distribution, Sony beta cams, and all that sort of stuff. So the equipment was there. It was still very expensive to edit, but it was easier to use than shooting on film, which is what I'd been doing with the government and COI. You could turn it around a lot faster. So why on earth did the bank start investing in video? What was happening during the 80s? I'm sure you'll remember this, the Lawson boom and the Big Bang and the rest of it. There was a lot of liberation that happened within the banking sector. And there was a lot of growth, but there was also far too much competition. There were too many banks on the high street. And I'm talking about Midlands. Of course, people will know Midlands now as HSBC. And Midlands was actually quite troubled. It had invested in a big bank in America called Crocker, and was in big trouble. So eventually it had to sell to HSBC. But in the run up to that, they were fighting everyone else for retail banking. So retail banking was a really interesting development back in those days, because up until then, if you wanted to go to the bank, it was like going to a mahogany lined post office, in the sense there was a big grill, and only a third of the bank was where customers could be, and 2/3 of it was where the staff were. And I used to close at 3:30 in the afternoons because they had to tot up all their takings and get them off. They were pretty uncustomer friendly. I think you describe them. Do you remember those days?
Oh God, it was awful. It was awful. I mean, most people had a bank. Well, they didn't have a bank account. They were in the post office or a building society. I remember banks were always a bit more formal than.
Yeah, and it was all done with checks.
Yes.
Barclays had introduced the ATM, and those gradually took off. And the reason why ATMs took off was because people didn't want to go into the banks, because they hated the experience so much of standing in a queue, writing out their checks with a surly cashier. Meanwhile, in America, banks are much more friendly. And so there was an idea, well, let's make our banks more friendly, make them more accessible, and certainly improve customer service. And so suddenly there was a real need to train up staff, because people did not join a bank to be customer friendly. You went and worked for Sainsbury's if you wanted to do that. But banking, no, you did it for the pension. And what was the guy in Dad's Army? Captain Mainwaring. That was the thing. It was I'm sure, a lot of them were still wearing collars and ties and bowler hats, even in the 80s. So the banks had to shake all this up, and it required them to change attitudes and also to train people up as well, because suddenly new products were coming, particularly overdraft products and insurance. They were starting to cross-sell stuff, insurance, pensions, all that kind of thing. And so NatWest, God bless them, built a branch in the top floor of NatWest Tower. So you go to NatWest Tower and get zoomed up to the top floor or thereabout. I think the top floor was probably for where the very senior bankers had their fancy lunches, but maybe just below that. There was this mahogany interior bank mocked up where they made videos. And I can't remember the guy who did it. He was a wonderful old school video producer in-house who would run the thing. And you'd have to work with his crew, but of course they couldn't remember. They didn't have to write them, or they didn't have to really direct them, to be honest. So they brought in people like us who came from television and film and so on, who knew a bit about storytelling. And you'd be given this brief to make selling pensions interesting in 25 minutes.
Yes, and that's one thing I want to move on to, because I mean I think it's fascinating, because what you've got here in the 80s, and in particularly, I think in the Midland Bank and NatWest, as you say, is they have production facilities.
Yes,
it's incredible. They're almost becoming filmmakers,
Yes.
And they have. I mean, what I've seen is they have production facilities, they have recording, they have distribution. They've got the whole. So the question then that leads me on to this is, why were you guys brought in? You've kind of alluded to this there, because from what I've seen in the archives, it's almost like a hybrid model. Like they're doing some of it, but they're also bringing in agencies. And I think a big part of this story is this is really the rise of the agency, I think, in internal comms.
It was definitely
I think video really. I mean, I know there'd been agencies before which had helped them out with company magazines and stuff, but so that's the question. Why? What was this model? Why would you bring in an agency if you had the facilities already?
It was an interesting one, because the Shell Film Unit, which was the archetypal one, did hire filmmakers. So and the post office had Grierson, for God's sake, made Royal Mail for the post office. So they were hiring artisans, craftspeople. But the banks didn't. So the banks didn't trust these creatives in-house, and so they'd promote bank managers, people who worked in the branch network. So you'd have a guy who used to be running, the branch in Golders Green, and suddenly he was a video producer because he quite fancied it. And it was really, really quite bizarre. I mean, what was good is they really understood the audience. And I'd use that. So whenever we were developing scripts and so on, they were great for that. But they knew absolutely nothing about telling a story.
Go on.
And so, I mean, it was really quite amusing. And this is a time when Video Arts is around, John Cleese's company.
Yes.
And John Cleese and team had seen that corporate was a good way of making money, which he was right. He sold it for several millions. But they were using humor. And so the other corporate people were thinking, maybe we should get professionals in who can write a script and make something slightly watchable.
So basically so your role then, or the agencies knew as well, is it's creating scripts, it's really storytelling, it's creating engagement, and what it's just adding professionalism,
casting and directing. Yeah, because it was always actors. So you'd be casting the actors, you'd be rehearsing them, and you'd be directing the video, and obviously you'd be doing the edit as well, which was a complete nightmare, because you were trying to make a story that was appealing to the viewers, and then you'd be in the West End, of course, which is where everybody edited, paying a fortune back in those days, online suites of like 400 quid an hour or something stupid, and you'd be sending VHS tapes up to Sheffield, which is where the marketing department of Midland Bank was, for them to approve them, and then they phone you up, oh, no, don't like this, don't like that. So it was probably the most painful period I've ever had in the edit suites was working on these videos.
So basically, you guys were more or less making these videos then, really, and then they'd have the production facilities.
They started closing them down because they realised it wasn't that. They could probably make more money out of a floor of NatWest Tower than have it as a studio that was only really being filmed in once a week, and so they started outsourcing everything. So in the end, I was hiring TV studios to make these things.
When did this happen? Roughly when?
About late 80s.
Yes. So by the late 80s, it's super professionalized. Would that be right?
Oh yeah, and it went back. Okay, they had a couple of problems. So Midland, for instance, were producing so many of these videos, and of course they'd be sent out to the branches as VHSs, and the branch staff were expected to sit down and watch them. And literally, they were half an hour long, not like videos these days. They were proper half-hour pieces. And so on a Thursday, usually it was a Thursday morning, they'd have to come in early and sit in the manager's office where the treasured VHS player was and the dusty old TV, and they'd watch these. And what we discovered was that we were producing, or Midland was producing, too many videos for the network. They had kind of video indigestion because they were pumping too many. Because every divisional director of Midland Bank, whether it was pensions or insurance or what, wanted their own video, and usually wanted to be in it as well. So we had more supply outstripped demand. Let's put it that way.
But what I've seen in the I mean, and it actually I'll go back to the first question and then that my impression is, it is quite incredible, is that it was the banks, wasn't it, in the 80s that used. I mean, I know other I've even come across stuff in the post office, in railways. They were using videos. I know, but it's not just about. But I mean, I remember seeing, I think it was in 1983, when Midland Bank puts a video in basically every branch, and there's 3,000, and they press release and said, we are the biggest users of video now in the UK. So
I tell you what was behind it. I mean, apart from the banks needed a change and they needed to train.
There's a market change that makes sense.
But also marketing entered the banks. So at Midland, a guy called Kevin, I'm going to get his name wrong, I think it's Jackson, but I can't remember. He was the marketing director of M&S, and he introduced thongs to M&S. So that was his claim to fame. Anyway, so they hired him as the marketing director of Midland Bank, high salary, superstar status, and he decided to make banking customer centric, and so he created 3 different types of accounts, because he's saying, look, Ford have got different types of cars depending on who you are, so banks should be the same. And one was called Orchard, and one was called Vector, and there was one for yuppies called Vector, and Orchard I think was for married people. Anyway, Jasper, if you ever want to see, Jasper Carrot did a wonderful piss take of one of the commercials that was made about this. Because it was a bit pretentious, to say the least, and failed as well as a strategy. But Kevin Jackson was very, very keen on internal marketing. And as you know from doing these histories, internal marketing is just a way of talking at people, but with more money.
Yes, and that's what my impression is that what you see. I mean, look, internal marketing, to be fair, has been going on for decades, but I think in the 80s it really took off, and
it came off the leash.
It came off the leash, and the videos were there. But the other thing that, and this does make sense, and I think the other thing in the 80s as well is it's when banks actually. The model before the 80s was, if you were middle class, you had a bank account, and if you were working class, you went to a building society or the post office.
And you were paid in cash, of course.
And you were paid in cash, correct. Whereas the middle class had everything. They were very bank centric because everything went through the bank. And I think in the 80s, the banks go into that working class market. Is that right? They open it up.
Yeah. And partly because companies didn't want to pay in cash anymore. Because it was expensive to have all those brand envelopes, and it was dangerous, because of security.
I remember queuing up and getting my £13.60 from the Imperial Hotel where I used to work.
And say, is this all?
You'd have this envelope,
you open the slip and you say, "Oh my God, the government's taken £4.16 6 shillings."
I do
Those
remember.
are the days.
But you're saying that a lot of these ideas were coming from the States, yes? Because
a couple of things came from the States. One was the banking was a bit more open. If you look at the movies at the time, the banks weren't all like a Wells Fargo, Western. You could sit across a desk from someone and talk to them.
Yeah,
and tellers were over there, and so that was part of it. And the other thing was the rise of the back office. So what America have discovered is that actually you don't really need people. A lot of what you do is done much more efficiently if you put it in one center or in a regional center, data processing center, which of course then became call centers and so on and so forth. And why all the branches have closed down now is because banking is now done in these regional centers. And they could save a hell of a lot of money by doing that. But that was further down the track. That was in the early 90s.
But it's moving towards that. Now, one thing that actually did surprise me was, and because the banks at Midland has quite extensive records of these videos. I think because it spent so much money on them, and it did things like staff surveys and what I thought. And what's interesting is staff quite liked them. So I read one report and it said, different forms of communication at Midland. Most popular is video, right? All the staff seemed to like video, because my impression is that they didn't just show them the video. There'd be activities after the video.
There'd be a bit of chalk and talk training and so on. It was funny because I remember that they shared some of those results with us because we had contracts year after year after year.
Interesting.
And they had some really high budget ones and some really important ones, and then there's one I made which got to the top of the charts and stayed there, and they were so angry about that. And all it was about how you can get a car loan from a Midland bank, and that means if you go into a dealership, rather than doing their finance, you went in with cash, as it were. You had 10 grand ready to spend, bankers draft and so on. And so we did a thing in the studio where someone's negotiating with the salesman and getting the price down and we used the music from Top Gear.
Oh yeah,
the famous Fleetwood Mac track, The Chain, and it shows you how much budget was in those days that I could afford to buy The Chain from Fleetwood Mac to use in these videos. And because it was emotional, it's a very emotional piece of music. That's why they remembered it. And the head of video then never forgave me because it's much more expensive and much more strategic videos were being knocked off the top place for that reason. But it shows you emotion sells.
But it certainly does, and I think, again, I think because banking was always so rational, and then suddenly, Clark, these guys had to become. But why? When you say there was actually a chart, was there then of videos?
Yeah, they'd share with us how well because literally they're being pumped out every week, and so if you've got a low rating, then they'd use that to beat you over the head with.
Oh, interesting. So they were auditing this then?
And they were tough. I mean, this was the rise of the agency time, but my God, if a client said jump, you said how high. I mean, it was, I remember working regularly through the night, editing these things, waiting for the marketing director to get up in the morning, go to the office and look at the VHS. And I'd be asleep on a couch at 7 a.m. in a Western editing suite, waiting for the feedback. And
Oh, that's really interesting. So, and some of that would be, as you're saying with this video you made, which was more popular than what they wanted it to be. They were actually then checking with staff. Then they were doing audience research by the.
Well, it was always post factum. So basically, you'd have the marketing team would say what would happen is for approval, it would be the subject matter expert. So the head of insurance or whoever works in this team would look at it and say, oh, now you've said this in UK and you didn't say UK and Northern Ireland. And so we had to go back so there's a lot of fact checking. But no, they shoved them out and then asked people what they thought.
I see.
No, they did. We didn't have and you didn't have to because it was like a long going soap series. Yes. You get feedback from episode 7 while you're making episode 12. So you can, you can adjust accordingly.
Fascinating. So, but it sounds to me though. So they were actually doing kind of feedback almost. They were looking at how the staff felt and then feeding that back too.
Yeah, I mean, it's still it's still a very top-down organisation. So I think we just got numbers. We didn't get qualitative feedback. We just got, how they rated it out of 10.
How who the staff or
the staff, yeah.
Oh no, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's very useful.
But for that period, even that you know you got to think. I mean, in the 60s, the idea you would talk to your staff in a bank was just totally alien. Even in the 70s,
totally alien.
So
and that was the effect of the marketing department of this this guy from M&S, because obviously he believed in asking your customers what they thought.
And so what? This sounds to me then. I mean, if you're able to use Fleetwood Mac and whatever, how big what were these budgets?
Well,
how much were they spending?
They were, in the old days, we used to charge £1,000 a minute. Was this kind of rough thing. So a classic training video would be £30,000 back in 1985. And there used to be more than that. That's a great thing, because in the old days of industrial film, you made a film for a client, and it would be £60,000 to £100,000 because it was proper 16mm film and big crews and all that sort of stuff, and would take 6 months to make. These are much quicker turnaround, but over the year, you could build a business on a couple of these clients, and several agencies did.
So basically, what you're saying is the cost comes down, but the volume goes up. Is that right?
It absolutely did. And so it became good business, and Crown was the number one, but then the Edge started to come up the rankings. They started doing good stuff, and Dale Palmer was DRPG was doing stuff, and so on. There were a lot of casualties. It was, when I think back to those days, of 100 agencies that were around in those days, there weren't that many. Probably 20 agencies around in those days. Hardly any still survive.
So about of the 20 agencies there were around in the 80s, about 20 agencies who were mainly focusing on video.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Cricket, loads of them. And I mean, the Edge still exists. It was bought by the Zinc. But I think that's probably the only one. Oh, and DRPG just had their 45th birthday. So yeah, they still exist. Very much so.
No, so there has been a legacy of this. This has left a legacy within the sector.
What was interesting, and when the big bucks came along, this is going slightly off your theme, but they started to do events. And they decided they should have a sales conference for bank managers. And we were invited to pitch for it because we were their major supplier of video. And fortunately, I had done events. I had a bit of an events background. And we ended up doing, we hired the Hall 5 at the NEC, which is between the exhibitions. They'd always have downtimes. They were 3 or 4 days. And so we hired Hall 5. It's enormous. I mean, it's 4 football pitches, bigger than that. And I built a high street actually in the NEC Hall 5. And they were just relaunching the interior of the banks. A guy called Wolf Olins.
Yes, of course.
Wally Olins is the man who redesigned Poland, or rather the brand for Poland. Great genius. Did BT as well. Anyway, he redesigned the Griffin, the Midlands Griffin, but more importantly, he redesigned the interiors of the banks and turned them into a retail environment. So we had this bank sitting in the middle of this high street, and then we lifted it to reveal the new interior. And all around it, we had all their competitors and a big high street, and people went down into the high street to have lunch. And we had a Rolls Royce come in to take the winners of their incentive program. So and that was thick end of £600,000 for a one-day event, which back in '89, that's
huge.
It was millions. Several million in today's money.
No, it's million. I don't know if you've just watched on was it BBC the Gold, the Brinks robbery.
Yes.
And they were saying, I think they robbed 26 million, which in today's money would be over 110, 115 million.
So that's it.
So when you did this event, who was this for? Was this for the Midland Bank? Was it?
It was absolutely for Midland Bank before it became HSBC, and we had 2,500 bank managers in the room together. It was quite terrifying, but great fun.
So you do the event, and then is there like a conference afterwards?
The event was the conference. So when you got 2,500 people, you can only really talk at them. So it was 6 hours of talking at them, but with a lot of showbiz involved. And then the following year, we did one with the biggest screen ever used at any kind of corporate event. And that one it went down in infamy as the sell event, because the marketing director went on stage and told, it's all about selling, we're going to cross-sell more. And he got all the senior reports from the bank to stand at the back. It's huge stage, 50 meters across. And they all had to jump in the air going sell. And of course, they all hated it. and he was gone. Within a couple of months, Kevin. They got rid of it.
So this is Jackson, is that right?
I'll have to check his name. I think it's Kevin Jackson. And then the next year we were going to do one with Noel Edmonds, and it was going to be done Starlight Expressway. So we're going to have all the audience with a great big roller rink around them. And they bought it and they agreed to it. And then a few weeks later, they said, Mark, we're going to cancel. And that was when the financial troubles really came to a head.
This is 1987.
90, I suppose 91, yeah. And Kim McMahon did a deal with HSBC.
Yes.
And it became HSBC. And the old Midland was dead.
Yes, and that was because of the bank, wasn't it? The Crocker Bank, or was it the
American... Yeah. I mean, they let costs run away with themselves. And but mostly, it was Crocker was what did them in. They invested in this mid-American bank, which they didn't really understand.
No.
But, a lot of companies did that.
No.
M&S at the same time.
Yes. No, they were. And but of course, I mean, in the 1970s, Midland Bank becomes the Midland Banking Group, and they actually take over Thomas Cook.
That's right.
So you have, it's crazy. You have Britain's biggest high street bank and Britain's biggest, tourist stage, and they own. So it is very bizarre. I mean, at one point,
and that went bust as well, of course.
And that went bust as well. I mean, at one point, Grand Metropolitan, which became Diageo, actually owned Hog and Das. Right? I mean, it was just, but they were just going into.
It was the time of, Hansen was the best at this, of conglomerates, and the idea was as you get into lots of different, because you're hungry for growth. And now within the banking sector, it was difficult to grow because it was oversupplied. We had all these banks, which is why Lloyd's agreed to have HBOS, because when we had the credit crunch, because they thought, they've been trying to buy them for ages and ages. And so, but that was actually not a good acquisition by any means.
No,
HBOS was in such a mess.
Well, it killed Lloyd's almost. Yeah. But so you're saying, so basically, and this is fascinating, is that the companies who make the videos, like Crown, later on move into events.
Yeah, we went into events because the budgets were some, instead of a £30,000 video, you were making a £500,000-600,000 event. And, BT, for instance, Ford was spending much more than that with imagination on their car launches. Famously, Gary Withers was able to take millions out of Ford for some most spectacular launches. It was a heyday, and a lot of production companies, Jack Morton, HBRCM, Imagination, suddenly grew very fast and very big. Purchase Point, because suddenly you went into a client and you pitched for a business and you walked away with £300,000-400,000 worth of business for one event.
Yes, but this is, for me, these events are internal comms, and I think that what's happening. So can I just quickly check this first thing? This first event you did for Midland Bank at the NEC. This was what, 1985? You were saying
1989.
1989. Thank you.
Probably 1988, to be honest.
Okay, but it's
the other one then. Yeah.
But it's towards the 80s, because my feeling is there is a seismic shift in internal comms. In the 80s, and that you have these huge, and you still have them today, but you have these huge events, these huge management conferences, which like shows, and then you have the CEO, and then they go on these road tours. They go on these tours around the company. The road tours, aren't they?
Road shows.
Road shows.
Yes.
And it seems to me, would it be fair to say that kind of road show, that almost like glamorization, Hollywoodization of the sea, kind of grew out of these events?
Yeah, it did. I mean, these are large companies, and so they had to get to their people. And you could get 2,500 bank managers to come to the NEC. Of course, you could, but you know, how many people were they employing back in those days? 30,000, something like that. So you couldn't get to the staff. And so I remember doing road shows for all the McVitie's, for God's sake. United Biscuits used to go on the road and do road shows for the staff,
Yes.
making the biscuits in the factories around the UK. And some of them we had to do, 4 o'clock in the morning, because that's when the shift started or ended.
And when did you start doing these road shows? When did that?
That was 90s, in the
yes.
90s.
So no,
that 90s.
This makes perfect, and I think that's really interesting. That you're going from video to these big.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd had these mass meetings before, but these meetings or these big events. Are you also videotaping them? Or are you then distributing them to the rest
you would. I mean, there was a time when we used to broadcast them live. Can you imagine that? And so Tetra Pak, it was a good example of that, where there was, we'd do these events in Lund, and we broadcast them all around the world, because Tetra Pak were all around the world, and that was using satellite transmission technology.
Incredible.
But they were very, very expensive, and what they discovered was that people really didn't like them, because you were huddled into some ghastly room with a screen and watched people having a lot of fun in Lund, and you're in Mexico, making cartons. So the CTN was very, very big in that area, and that market kind of disappeared because it just proved it was not an effectual way to talk to people.
And what period was this? When would this?
Yeah, you're asking. I can remember now. This would have been mid-90s. Yeah.
Interesting. But even those, would it be fair to say that those events you did for Midland Bank, they were videoed and then shown to the staff?
Oh yeah, we filmed them. Yeah, absolutely filmed them, cut them down, and yeah, there were edited versions done for the staff. Not that much, because there was this worry that actually all these bank managers are having a great time, because literally they go down into the high street, and we had 4 different restaurants they could choose from. They could go into and enjoy a French meal, or they could have an American meal, or whatever. So there's a lot of money spent on these things, and to a certain extent, senior management didn't really want to tell the staff about them.
No. So it was controlled, and so going back now, wrapping this up into a bigger picture, because again in the archives, what we've seen is that they start at the Midland Bank. They start mentioning internal comms in the 60s, but it's still very written and top down.
Yeah,
and then in the 70s, when they formed the group, the Midland Bank, then they set up this internal communication committee. But it seems to me what really fire starts internal comms is video. That's what really. And so, did when you were making this, we're making these videos, later events, was this self-consciously done within internal communications? Did they use the term "we're using this for our internal comms," or was this just it was video and it in the end it just got merged into that?
That's a really interesting question. Really interesting question. I think that they were talking about the video unit. So they focus on the technology rather than actually what it was intended to do, the audience it was intended for. A lot of it was called training, because there was a history of using film for training in large industrial companies.
Yes, going back to the 1930s. This goes way back.
So when you're going to the top guys for money, it's a training film. They kind of understood that. Internal comms, employee comms, no, they didn't use that term back then. It took a while, and I think that's really when HR got in. But because, like I say, this is all run from marketing, for heaven's sake. We didn't touch the HR department. Had no idea what they did. And then, of course, the HR department said, "Hang on, internal comms, it's our people, blah 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 blah." And then 60% of IC units within companies became part of HR.
Yes. Well, and this was what, 1980s, 1990s.
Yeah, I would say in the 90s, HR started to take over.
In the 90s, yeah. But it's interesting. I think you're right. But it's interesting. What we've detected, and it's incredible, is that the first IC unit. And you're right, they're called IC. They're not called IC departments.
No,
They're called IC units, and they often exist within either public relations and then later on HR. Is the 1970s. The late 70s is the post office. They said no, but it's very late. It's 1979. It really is. It's the 80s, I think. So this much broader discourse than of internal comms. This is more in the 90s. Is that right?
Yeah. I think the post office is an outlier. I remember looking because we're working for BT, and so they had a lot of the archive ended up in BT. And I remember looking at photographs they had of exhibitions, internal exhibitions, from the 1930s, where they were exhibiting different kinds of telegraph poles and stuff, and come along to this thing. Oh, this is the new telegraph pole.
Yeah. No, they're incredible. The reason why is they in 1931 is that Sir Stephen Tallents works for them, who's best mates with Grierson. And Tallents is the founder of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations.
Yeah,
and he'd worked before for which was linked to where you'd worked for the Ministry of Information. He'd worked for the Empire Marketing Board.
Yes.
Right, and this was in the 20s. And so he moves with Grierson, and they move the film department into
right, of course, yeah.
And so it's it's really, but I think you're right. Thank you for saying that. I think the post office, and do you know what's incredible is so the post office sets up an internal comms unit in the 70s. The BT side of the post office had actually set up an internal comms or employee comms in the 60s. That's like one of the and a unit for this. So
because they had to convert people to the telephone. The lovely posters saying, "What would you use the telephone for? You can call the butcher and order your meat." It's sort of like AI now. There's wonderful posters. How would they had this lady in a sort of twin satin pearls with the phone saying, "What do I use this thing for?" Right, I can call the doctors. Yeah. Brilliant.
I can
check. And the other one you had to remember at the time, the other outlier was MMB, the Milk Marketing Board. So the Milk Marketing Board had a budget for video, and I never really understood why, but I think it must have been the government, Quango or something. But if you imagine what was happening is with the arrival of the trains, milk could suddenly go from the southwest to all parts of the UK, and so we had to encourage people. So they created this great big network, and they had to encourage people to continue to drink milk. So
yes.
The Milk Marketing Board,
and this was in the 80s.
Oh my God! No, I think it got disbanded in the 80s. It was more the 70s.
But they were using video in the 70s, though. There was.
They were. In fact, it wasn't video; it was AV, audio visual. We had these 35mm slides, and they clunked through them. And they go to schools and that sort of thing, and there's a lot of advertising as well, wasn't it? Who was it? I mean, someone Rushdie, I think, did one of their commercials. Naughty but nice.
That's right. I do remember that.
Salmon bloody Rushdie, for God's sake.
No, it's incredible. I mean, but of course, I mean, I think in the 80s, I mean, the money that was going into advertising into video was just phenomenal.
Oh, it was huge. It was huge, and you saw suddenly the explosion of all these. I mean, just from our own point of view, Crown, we got to this point where we actually bought LBC radio. and moved into these massive offices in Hammersmith, and we did the early B Sky B. The news of B Sky B was done by us. So we leveraged off this tiny thing called corporate video and became a sort of megla media corporation, which went spectacularly bust in 1992.
Oh, but that's incredible. That really is good. And just a quick question going back early, because I picked up on this kind of change in the technology of making film was very rapid in the 70s and early 80s. So you had the audio visual, then you had, what is it? But even before, there's VHS, and then there's what's the other one called again?
Well, the industrial one's called U-matic.
U-matic.
And these are quite big machines. They cost a couple of grand each, and you could. You just got a better quality picture than the videos. And so, I mean, generally speaking, we shot on, on proper cameras and Beta SP, and we'd be editing in the same edit suites that you'd use for doing documentaries and dramas and so on and so forth. So, in fact, we support the post-production industry was partly supported by the corporate video industry for a while.
Oh, that's fascinating. And so U-matic and then Betamax, are they the same, or is that?
No, Betamax was a domestic format. That was a VHS alternative, and that died, although it was a better format. But so Sony really did focus on professional. So they made Betacams, the cameras. Oh God, I have to remember all this stuff now. They made the cameras, and and U-matics was the workhorse, which you would it was where you'd view stuff, show stuff to clients. We'd all had little theatres with U-matic machines and so on. That's bloody horrible to work with, I tell you, nightmare.
But a lot easier than the other stuff, though, I imagine.
Oh yeah. I mean, I started off using 2-inch, which was enormous, great machines, the size of this room, and the tapes were so heavy. I used to go to the edit, and my car would be scraping along the road because it had all these incredibly heavy tapes, and of course they had to be erased and reused because they were expensive.
Yes.
So a lot of stuff got wiped.
Yeah, and so VHS, and that was just for the home use.
That was distribution. VHS, and that was a revolution. Suddenly, you could get a VHS player, and people knew how to work them because they had them at home, and you put those into offices, and that was a revolution. That really was.
You'd put them in. Now, one quick question going back to the banks. You said, okay, so you've got Midland Bank, you've got NatWest.
Yeah.
Why not the other two? Why not Lloyd's?
They didn't want you to, literally. So we actually had to give up NatWest because we were doing so much work with Midland. Okay. So they would hate the idea that their agency was working for another bank.
Yeah, but
they're very, very secretive.
But why? Barclays and Lloyd's, were they?
Yeah. I mean, Barclays, I think more than Lloyd's. Barclays were. We didn't have the Barclays account, but later on, I got very involved with Barclays because they were one of the first ones to start using digital. They were the very first people to send stuff on mobile phones to their staff.
Interesting.
So they're quite innovative. Lloyd's was always the boring conservative bank that
always has been.
was always behind the curve.
Yeah. Always has been. And just one last question, but thank you. This has been excellent. Is I came across, this was just bizarre in the archives, this thing called Prestel. I don't know if you've heard of it. View Data Prestel, which was like, and then I checked it out on the internet, and it was referred to as the British internet that never was, right? So, and so what I've seen was when they, obviously, as you said, once you get videos, you have to invest in television screens. So suddenly every bank now has a screen in it with a video. And then the idea is you could then send messages. You could use that screen, not just for video, but for these Prestel. And you could, they were trying to develop a form of home banking, I think, as well.
That's right. Yes, I remember.
Can you recall anything?
It was partly because of Thomas Cook, because what they wanted to do is they wanted the travel agents to book holidays through this system. And do you remember CFAX?
Yes.
Well, it's the same idea basically. Is it you use a little bit of the TV signal, a tiny bit which is never seen on the screen, is used to create computer-generated screens, very, very, very basic and like early Pac-Man type graphics. But the idea it was interactive, and so you could actually you could do, and it was France was ahead of it with Mintel. Mintel was the French one, and Mintel went a lot further.
Yes,
it had more government subsidy behind it. But of course, they were all blown out when the internet happened. As soon as someone invented the the browser, and they all disappeared. But yes, indeed, I've forgotten about Prestel. Good God!
But what was it used extensively for internal comms? I mean, my impression was they said you could send messages like here are exchange rates, or if there was an order from the bank, did they use it much, or
for that sort of stuff? I mean, to tell you the basic information which you needed to do your job, which might have come in a letter or something from head office in the old days. Well, they had these bags, didn't they? The bag would come in the morning. Good God, I've forgotten all about that. So the bag will come in the morning with all these missives in it from and what the interest rates are now. Put your interest rates up, and then at the end of the day, all the money and all the ledgers would go back into this bag and be taken off by security or someone back to head office. So it replaced the bag, a bit like the diplomatic bag in the Foreign Office.
Yes. So again, this was. It was a way of being a, but I think this must have been quite a sea change. The idea that from the center, and it goes.
It was very unpopular.
It was unpopular.
It wasn't used much for internal comms because it was slow. It was. It didn't look very good. This is the time of television and movies, for heaven's sake, and you're getting this ghastly little cursor clicking out. It's like going back to Morse code. So it was not popular. It was clunky, and of course it would break down. Because it relied on BT's network, so quite often it would break down. But mostly it was the user interface was just rubbish. So yeah.
Okay. No, thank you. That's really helpful because I've got a little bit of archival evidence, and then I've got a little bit. Okay, I think I'll stop it. Thank you so much for that.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I've got lots of photographs of all this stuff, so I'm happy to send you pictures of these ridiculous showbiz events that we used to do.
If you could, please, because you said before, well, this might not be with what you're doing. No, it's totally. I think these events and later on these roadshows, that's internal comms. It's just another form. It was them, and again, I think. Did you come across this, by the way? This is actually the last question, but one thing I've noticed in the archive is they are making a distinction between internal comms to managers and internal comms to the staff, and they make that clear. And actually, what they say is it's the communication with the managers, which is often fair. What did that come through in the 80s, where they kind of say these are videos for the.
Yeah, I'd like to say that actually came from us. Because what happened was, all the agencies, we were just artisans churning this stuff out, and then we suddenly realised that actually a lot of the corporate clients didn't know what the hell they were doing, and so consultancy was born, and so SDL and MCA, which is the one where I worked, we started advising clients. So we used to go in there and say, hang on, you cannot talk about this stuff to the managers at the same time as the staff because you completely undercut them. And so we started doing segmentation. So audience segmentation became very, very important in the mid-90s, late 90s, and we started segmenting audiences.
Internally,
yeah.
So you would have a different form of communication for
absolutely. Generally speaking, you get your managers together, part of a roadshow just for the managers. Then you give them a pack, and PowerPoint arrived by then, and so they get a PowerPoint deck which they then use in their. Sometimes we printed it out. Often we did presenter type things, and they get their stuff together, and they then present the message on to their staff. And we discovered that a lot of them were editing it quite a lot as well. So, some parts of organizations were not getting the message from the top at all because line managers were saying, they're saying this in head office, but trust me, we're not going to do it. So that's another story. And that's really was the birth of communications consultancy, internal comms consultancy, is when we started to look at audience segmentation. And then it was channel management, and then it was research and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
I haven't looked back since.
That's incredible. And a lot of this then is originating from videos. Yes, the videos created demand agencies, and then the agency started developing new products or new solutions.
I'd have to think they went through because John Smythe Wood Lambert didn't come from a video. Oh yeah, he worked with Wally Owens, so he came from a design background.
Okay, so you've got a design. Yes.
Yeah, because of brand. Remember how important brand was back in those days? When they realised that brand could put so much value on the balance sheet, suddenly these brand agencies sprang up. And became very, very powerful indeed.
Yes. So you've got a design background, but video certainly helped this because
you So we were from a video background, doing consultancy, and Smythe Wood Lambert was from from a design background.
From a design, very interesting. And we've come across a company twice. So they appear in a consultancy. They appear in the post office, and a lot. I mean, tons of the big. And then they appear in the Midland Bank as Barker Lions. So have you heard of
How do you spell that? BAR?
I think so. LYONS Lions. I think it was Barker Lions or something.
Oh God, yes. Oh my God, yes. Barker Lions, or was it Lions Barker?
Lions Barker, something like that.
Lions Barker. Okay. Lions Barker, yeah, were very influential. They were a PR agency, and they're in where Royal Bank of Canada was for a while, down by the Thames. And yeah, they were a PR agency that really saw the value of employee communications and branding, and yeah, you take me back now. I remember visiting their offices and being very impressed with the first time I'd gone into an office, it had glass walls everywhere. Yeah. Barker Lions, I think it was or might have been Lions Barker, but yeah. So they were, but they were like a firework. And then they disappeared.
And they disappeared. Yeah, they just pop up in the archive. Very corporate, very well planned. So so we found, I think it's perhaps the first ever internal communications campaign in 1978, and it's called the Quality of Service campaign at the post office. And it's an internal comms, and it's done by Barker Lions. They actually.
There you go. Yeah.
So
I mean the advertising agencies, because we sold Crown to WPP, so suddenly we were sucked in amongst the advertising agencies, and they really didn't understand what we were doing at all. They absolutely didn't get it. And they do a new brand for a client, and they said, "Well, okay, you're going to launch the new logo," and that was it. Literally, you just show people the logo, and you say, "And these are the values and the mission of the company," and it's all been designed by some 22-year-old in the brand agency. No real talking to the staff whatsoever. So we'd have these incredibly crap values, and then of course they all became the same. So everybody was innovative and
so a lot of that richness and textuality that you developed earlier
disappeared completely. Disappeared completely. I remember doing NTL. The only one I kind of remember is NTL, which became Virgin Media. And it was make some money, have some fun, do some good. And NTL lost a load of money. It was toxic to work there. So, and it certainly didn't do any good. So, I mean, seriously, there's a whole book to be written about mission, vision, and values during the 90s.
That's fascinating. All right, well, I'll stop it. Thank you so much for your brilliant insights. And
it's my pleasure, as ever. And thank you so much for all the work that you do and the academic rigor you bring to it.
Thanks so much.